So my name is Aisha. I'm a sophomore at the college studying sociology and educational studies. Um, and I will go more into like what I do on campus to help contextualize this training. And Avery, I
Yes,
know the same, but
literally the same. My name's Avery, sophomore at the college studying sociology and educational studies as well.
yes. So today our training is on identity workshopping, identity trainings, how to implement them, and the fishbowl exercise, which we will get to practice very soon. So we're going through the importance and methods of leading these reflections. And we'll like through the exercise, this is just like one of the many tools that you can use to implement these practices through your organizations. And it's one of many again. So hopefully we'll get enough time to actually practice it, because I know Avery and I enjoyed it very much when we were participants. So just some background on us and our connection with identity. We're both co-chairs of FIRE, as we've mentioned, and the whole organization is centered around the first general income identity. And as mentoring coordinator and team leaders, we kind of have organized and led or been a part of trainings and reflections on identities, how it applies to the team leader job. And also through PBHA, we do a lot of programs. I personally do Strong Women, Strong Girls, BRI Extension, and the Harvard Muslim Youth Program, which aligns a lot with our identity. So we're constantly in that reflective state of mind. And Harvard Islamic Society, again, heavily based on identity, leading community conversations about identity and the intersection of multiple identities. And I'll pass it to Avery.
Yeah, the only other org on here is Harvard BMF, which is the Black Men's Forum, which obviously is very identity centered. But I think something really important, we can go on to the next slide, is understanding that identity work isn't just important in organizations or teams that are solely focused on identity. It can be important in many other settings. So a question for you all, why do y'all think that this identity work is important? And more specifically, or you can also answer this question, can you think of times when identity has come into play in the work that you do? And yeah, feel free to take time to think about it. But if anybody wants to share out, feel free to unmute or raise your hand or send it in the chat. Yes, Shivani, go ahead.
I actually feel like the framing you guys started with helped me understand this question better. And I think it's just because it helps us connect with others, because by understanding ourselves, then we can better understand where others might be coming from, differences and similarities, and how we co-create spaces then.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing.
And yes, upvote to what Jessica said in the chat, making sure people feel valued in the space, because there can be such a diversity of identities, even within organizations that are centered around identity. So yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that. Are there any other times, or we can move on if not, and you can continue reflecting or sharing in the chat? Okay, so the reason that identity is so important to focus on is because it, as many of you have mentioned, it can be the source or like the cause of why we do something. So considering history, so the history of your identity, how that affects the way you perceive things, and the cause, it could be the reason that you do something. I know personally I joined FIRE because I'm first and low income, and I continued to be committed to it because of that reason. It can be a circumstance. So when you consider experiencing struggles or privileges because of your identities or the intersection of your identities, and it can also affect your interactions with people. So in both good and bad ways, it can make you feel more connected to somebody or more distant. So it's important to recognize this early on, since ignorance in identity and our own reflection on our identity does no good in learning about each other and from ourselves. And finally, like coming with perspective, coming from a certain background can kind of give you insight into that background, but also we have to keep in mind we are not the like sole representative of our so many backgrounds. So, and also having a specific background can lead you to not have perspective on a different background. So now we'll go into why
Yes.
it's further why it's important.
Yes, yes. So identity can often be a really challenging thing to talk about or even think about. And I know for me, before I got to college, it wasn't really something that I'd ever taken the time to sit down and reflect on my identity and how it impacts the work that I do. So in this slide, we're talking about why like making that reflection space is important, not only for yourself, but organizations that you're leading or organizations that you're a part of. For one, you know, you learn about yourself. You begin to understand more about your identity, the privilege that you have, and how that specifically impacts your work. And then doing group reflections also allows you to learn from others and the people that you are leading along with, their identities, their privileges, their challenges that they're specifically facing. And then obviously like a broader goal and like a main goal of this reflection is applying it to your work and not just reflecting solely to reflect, but actually incorporating and being cognizant of these various identities, and how we can all work, regardless of the organization that we're a part of, to being more inclusive and intentional about, you know, serving the various identities among the organization. And this circle can really move in any way. There's no specific order to it. So I think it's just a constant flow of reflecting and application.
Yes, so we'll go into elements to consider. How do you actually implement these identity reflections, identity trainings into your organization? So in that there's like training process. So what you have to think of before training is the context and the outcomes. And then during the training, we'll provide you with some tools or some things to focus on. And finally, after the training, what kind of reflection space do you hold to make sure that you're constantly learning from each other and from the people that you're training. Oh, sorry, I just clicked it. So the context and outcomes, so the three contexts and outcomes are the reason you're doing the training, the audience, and the goal. So the reason and the audience kind of both inform the goal. So why are you doing this training? Is it just a reflective, like a general reflective space? Is there a specific incident? Or is it just to understand like privilege and combating oppression within the organization and outside of it? Audience, again, is it who are we training? Who is the target? Are they going to be present at the training? If they're not, what are they losing? And those who are there, like what are they gaining from it? And again, finally, the goal is informed by the reason and the audience, and it kind of helps you recognize in the post-training reflective space to see what steps need to be taken from the training and like what you learn from it and how the organization can be more inclusive as a result. And now, since we've been talking a lot, we would love to hear from all of you. Can anyone share out some examples of your own orgs, within your own orgs, of the reason, the audience, the goal of implementing identity reflective practices? This can be within Harvard, outside of Harvard, or it can be honestly something there's something that you're aware of but maybe not a part of, for whatever reason. We would just love to hear from you all. Yes, Olivia.
Yeah, I'll just share it quickly. So something that I've thought about a lot is like how do you create a teaching staff that is diverse and allows students to like feel, I don't know, supported and seen. You know, I feel like something I've noticed as a student is when I sort of walk into a space and I say, okay, like there are no female teaching fellows. Why is that? Why does that make me uncomfortable? Why is that something that I notice? But I think something that I've struggled with is sort of similarly like defining the goal, right? And as someone who doesn't feel qualified to run a kind of sharing space or training, trying to figure out how I would, I don't know, achieve the ultimate outcome, which is like ensuring that TFs know how to support students that are coming from a diversity of backgrounds. That makes sense.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. I think, yeah, it's so important. Even the little things that we don't notice, like, or some people fail to notice in terms of like teaching staff diversity and how that affects students and their experiences. But at least making those teachers culturally competent or like sensitive or conscious can improve the students' experiences a lot. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Anybody else? We'd love to hear more from you all. If you want, you can share in the chat, of course. Okay, that's okay. We're gonna have fun later. So we'll go into the tools. So I'll pass it to Avery.
Yes, no, we always have fun. And I think Zoom, like you always have to wait those awkward 20 seconds just to make sure nobody has any last thoughts right before the end. But yeah, some training tools for leading, identity reflection and trainings that aren't necessarily necessary, but are really helpful to make a more efficient, more productive, and more safe space. So some of the tools are grounding. So various like breathing or meditation exercises that can help calm down, your organization or the people in the organization, even yourself. Sharing, this obviously promotes connection, and is part of the circle structure that is in the upper right. It mentions like having, or we're talking about having a circle structure so that it can reduce the stress of, sharing out, and yeah, allows people to feel more connected when sharing out about these types of things. We also have quiet reflection and reflection on here. Reflection being more broadly of like sharing in a space and reflecting with others. Quiet reflection being like more personal, similar to what Olivia was mentioning with journaling, or actually literally what we did today. But yeah, those are just a few tools. And then post-training reflection, Aisha has this one.
Yes. So these are helpful in recognizing future trainings, like how can we improve from here? Again, I mentioned this before, action steps are the most important thing, because you can have all the reflective space you want, but if there are no steps to take after that, there's nothing that you're really gaining from it except a space to share, which is important, but it can also be supplemented. So just reflecting on the training itself overall, not even within the training, from both of these, from the self-reflection and the shared reflection, you kind of gain an understanding of what worked and what didn't work. So if your goals were met, or if you think that, like, what kind of timeline would allow the goals to be met, and what might be a better way in the future to incorporate these identity reflective practices. So even like after every training, whether you're a part of it or whether you're leading it, you'll learn a lot from yourself and from others, either by just hearing what other people have to say and like learning something new from them, or learning something about yourself by like just listening to other people talk about their own experiences. So now we will go, oh wait, I'll pass it to Avery.
Yeah, no, you're good. We wanted to really give you a lot of the background on identity training and reflection before we participate in our exercise, so that you all can be thinking like throughout the exercise how more specifically this might apply to your org or different spaces you find yourself in. But now that we've gone through that background, we're really excited to engage in the fishbowl exercise. And Aisha's going to talk a lot more about like what this really means.
Yes, this, I cannot emphasize enough. This was literally the best training that I've ever gone through. And this is what we're going to present is the abridged version of what has been adapted from Andrew Vincent, who's currently the events and outreach coordinator of the IOP, and he was heavily involved in PBHA during his undergrad experience. So we actually got this training through PBHA and through FIRE. And the purpose, a quote from actually his training, is to provide an opportunity to reflect with teammates about shared experience and to actively listen to teammates who hold identities different about their experiences. Yes, Samantha was part of this training, so I'm glad you remember it. But the style of this training is essentially, you see on a slide that there's people with their cameras on and people with their cameras off. So this is essentially those with their cameras off are listening, deeply listening, muted. They don't have to respond specifically to what the people who are sharing have to say. And this, how it starts is that, and we'll go through this, so it'll become more clear as we go through this training, is that you'll have one person share an identity that they want to talk about and want to reflect on. And anyone who feels comfortable joining in on that space of reflecting on that specific identity will join in, and everyone else will turn their camera off. So let's say, for example, actually, we'll go into the examples later, so maybe I won't do that. But this is the circle structure again, as we mentioned. So it kind of relieves the pressure of, oh, am I going next? Do I have to respond to the person right before me? Am I paying attention? Sometimes you can zone out for a second, and that's totally fine. It's natural. And you can also pass, which is really important, to give people the opportunity to kind of reflect within themselves. And if there's something particularly that they don't want to share with the group, that's totally fine. And what the questions are about, what the reflection is centered around, are questions about your identity, moments that you held pride because of it, and moments that you were shamed for it, and like a plethora of other things. I'll pass it to you.
And if that was, I know that was a lot all at once, but right before we do the exercise, we're gonna walk you through it as well. But just a timeline for the exercise. If you all choose to adapt this to your orgs, you give an introduction, which consists basically of guidelines, purposes, goals for the exercise. The exercise itself, which is obviously a lot of identity reflection that we had talked about, and emphasizing the importance of deeply listening to others. There's a debrief, which is a reflection kind of on the reflection, for like a lack of better words. And then the closing, which is what Aisha had mentioned, the action items and action steps. What steps need to happen to make space for more inclusive spaces among your orgs or whatever you're a part of, and what we all want to do collectively to make that happen.
Yes, and now for a severely abridged version of the exercise, because typically it would take much longer, and everyone would kind of be able to share, but we just want to give you all the tool. And again, this is adapted and abridged from Andrew Vincent's training, since we're short on time. Even though 10 minutes sounds like a lot, but when it comes to identity reflection, you really want to commit the time to it that you can. So again, we encourage you all to participate. And even though we're not all in the same organization, this exercise is still possible because we're all in the shared space in the classroom context. So your answers don't have to center around that, but it's just to clarify that this can be applied anywhere, basically.
Yeah. So for the next, normally we would do like a bit of grounding, but because it is abridged, we're going to skip the grounding. So we're going to act like so everybody take one big deep breath in and we'll release. So there is our expedited grounding. But for the next minute, there's a list of identities and possibly privileges, depending on how you feel, listed here. Just take the time to describe these identities for yourself. And this is what's gonna really lead us or guide us throughout the exercise. And this list, it says on there, isn't exhaustive. So if you feel like there's something else or another part of your identity that isn't on here, also feel free to jot that down. But we're going to give you all this space to just brainstorm and just write down as much as you can that you feel like you identify with. And it'll make it a lot easier participating in the exercise later. Okay,
so
no, go ahead.
Great minds. So I hope you all had some time to, just kidding. I hope you all had some time to kind of reflect. We're gonna stop sharing to kind of create a more circular space, and we're all looking at each other. And I'll actually also stop recording just because we'll be going through.
Sorry, I just turned it back on. Thank you both so much.